Does anyone know what this book is? Without me turning it to the front, making it too easy. Probably, yeah. These big books are call it Talmud. And if I would hold this one up, you'd probably say the same thing, no?
I don't know.
Does it say anything on the back? What? So I want to give you a little bit of an overview in this class that hopefully will serve you well, both as a general, both as informational, as well as informational, and also as an introduction to this class. So this class officially is Gemara.
Nice.
We're here to learn Talmud. Now, so what is Talmud? Where does it come from? When did it happen? Who wrote it? All that stuff. So the first rule that you have to remember, and this is again for informational purposes, I mean, this is not only for this class, but it's also something to remember in all learning, is that you have something that God introduced as a structure, and the structure of Torah, or teaching in general, learning in general, which we see is reflected in not only the Torah that he wrote, but also in all other things that were written after that. And the truth is, in any type of knowledge, any type of body of knowledge, this structure exists. It's just the way that the world was created, or the way we're created as human beings. That everything that's written needs to have some sort of explanation. The most important thing in understanding anything is context. If it's out of context, it doesn't make a difference how many times it's written, how clearly it's written. If it's out of context, if the context is not understood, so then someone's going to be understanding it the wrong way, or two people are going to be understanding it differently. I'll give you an example. Is 7 hairs a lot? If I write the Torah and I say commandment number 1, 7 hairs is too much, no context whatsoever. So if I say that 7 hairs in a glass of milk is too much, that makes sense. That's beyond disgusting. 7 hairs on someone's head, however, is way too little. So it depends on the context. So when someone writes something down, it automatically, 2 things happen. Is that no one has to remember it. Especially you put it on the internet, no one can forget it. It's there forever. Once it's written down, then you don't have to rely on someone remembering it properly. You write it down the way you want it, and it stays forever. The problem is that once something is written down, it loses all context. We're sitting here in a class, and I'm speaking to you about something, and it has a context. You're here in the school. This is a class. The class has a name. I'm here explaining something to you. Nobody has a very difficult time. Yeah, you have a question or two about, what exactly is being discussed, or in which way does it apply. You ask, a question or two. And when you ask it on the spot, you're going to get an answer because it's in a class. Everything is contextualized. But when something is written down, you have coming from what they're saying. So when something is written down, 2 amazing things happen. Number one, we're saved from forgetting it, but we also lose the context, which compromises the ability to understand it. So we gain that we didn't lose it, but we also lost that we don't really know what it's talking about anymore. And this is the struggle with knowledge, and specifically in Torah, maybe more than anything else, it sticks out in Torah, called the written law, the written word, the book, the 5 books of Moses, the Chumash, whatever you want to call it. And it starts from this week, we start reading it, Shabbos Bereshis. It starts with the story of the creation of the world, how God created the world in 6 days. And it takes us through the beginning peoples, the first generation, the first 10 generations, until Noach, where people lived for a very, very long time. And then 10 generations until Avraham Avinu. And then 7 generations until Moshe Rabbeinu, who took us out of Egypt and taught us the Torah and almost brought us into the land of Israel. And then the Torah continues to say that he passed away there in the desert. And that's the end of the book of the 5 books of Moses. The first book of the 5 books is almost 2,000 years of narrative. Historically, it spans about 2,000 years. And then from Parsha Shmos, or the beginning of Parsha Shmos, the second book, until the end of the 5th book is 120 years. It's Moshe's life. That's it. And nothing that it says in the Chumash, almost nothing, has any context whatsoever. And so therefore, together with these 5 books that he gave, which include many stories that have no background and that don't say the whole story, start from the middle of the story, don't end it, skip out the middle, whatever, because Torah is not a story book, and it's not even a book of laws necessarily. It's there as a way to remember certain things. Certain things are written down, and that together with the oral law that was given together with it gives you context, gives you background, gives you explanation, in order for you to understand what's written there. And that's the way it works. That's the way it works. Once you write something down, it loses context. You can pore over it. You could study it, whatever. You could pull it apart, and that's good because you'll have to. Because if not, you want to understand what it's talking about. And so that's why God gave an oral law together with a written law. It has to work that way. And that's the way it has worked, no matter how much stuff is written down. Now we write everything down. Everyone that has some sort of idea about something or whatever, so they write it down, they post it in, they print it in a book, they post it on the internet, they put it on a website, whatever it is that they send it out in weekly Torah emails, whatever it is. But everything is written down today, and as soon as things are written down, it was some sort of context. Okay, so that worked for many, many years, where the Jewish people knew what they were supposed to do based on what it says in the Chumash and the oral law that came with it. And over the years, the rabbis set it up, the teachers of the Jewish people set it up, and it's kind of a curriculum. It's a curriculum of repetition for memorization, right? Because the oral law is not, it's just that, it's oral, it's not written down. So it needs to be transmitted, taught, transmitted, it has to be understood and retained. So it's not enough only, like in this class, if I'm telling you something, so, my best hopes is that it's understood. If it's retained, it's a different question. But over there, it was critical that it was retained, because if it wasn't, so then, even in small part, even if there was one mitzvah or one halacha that was not retained, so then that halacha would be lost from the Jewish people forever. There was no Wikipedia, there was no book, there was no Google, there was no, somewhere it was archived somewhere. And you can go, if a person passed away, and then that's it. They took their memories with them, and that's it. And if they didn't pass it on to the next generation, someone didn't know it just as well as the previous generation, so then it was lost. And it happened. It happened that there were certain halachas that got fuzzy or that were forgotten and needed to be learned out again in different methods, because certain halachas were lost, because for whatever historical reasons of things that happened at the time. And this was a curriculum for 12 years. People would go to yeshiva and they would repeat the same things that they were taught by their teachers and by their teachers and by their teachers, literally all the way back to Moshe Rabbeinu. People memorized what Moshe Rabbeinu said, and then they passed it on to the next generation, and to the next generation. And Moshe Rabbeinu didn't make things once. It wasn't like he said it and one person remembered it. There was hundreds of people that heard it from Moshe Rabbeinu dozens and dozens of times, and he was there to answer questions over the 40 years throughout the wanderings in the desert. And then when we came into the land of Israel, again, the same thing happened. People sat and they repeated and repeated and repeated. And after a while, it became a curriculum of 12 years where you would be able to go through the whole Torah and repeat it enough, exactly the way it was heard, exactly the way it was taught from teacher to student, all the way back to Moshe Rabbeinu, exactly the same way that it came down from Mount Sinai. And that's authentic Judaism. That's as authentic as you can get. That's the Chumash, and that's the oral law that God gave us at Mount Sinai. Okay, so it came. So history continues to unfold. You have Yeshua comes in, he conquers the land of Israel. He splits it up into the different parts for all the different tribes. The Jewish people settle in the land. They start to get used to the whole lifestyle. And they're living their lives according to Torah. There was no government. There was no have like the find where I am. Maybe if it helps someone visually. See the era of the first temple. Okay, so after the era of the first temple came an era that was called the Tanaic period. This is where there were great sages who is the last of the people to transmit the oral law in the way it was passed down teacher to student for about 1,000 years, from Mount Sinai until that point. Then came along an individual by the name of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva, it says, he was 40 years old. He didn't know anything. He was brought up in an ignorant home, and he decided because of the story with the water penetrating the rock. So he said, if water can penetrate the rock, so then Torah can penetrate my head, even at an age of 40. And he went away to yeshiva, and he spent there again 12 years. That was the curriculum, 12 years, and he became a great sage, one of the greatest sages that ever lived. And then it says he came back, and then he went back. He came back for a few minutes, and then his wife said that he can go back for another 12 years. And then when he came back 12 years later, 24 years after he left originally, 40 and 24? What? 64. Great. So now he comes back at 64 years old. 64 years old. So 40 years he didn't know Aleph Beis. And at 64, he comes back home and he has 24,000 students. 24,000 students. And these students, he's all taught this curriculum, this 12-year curriculum, right? It's now 24 years later, it's the second 12-year period. And he's taught 24,000 students the entire Torah. And that should serve as a way that the tradition of the Jewish people and the laws of the Jewish people continue for many, many generations. Because all you need is one person to transmit it, like Rabbi Akiva taught 24,000 students. So any one of those 24,000 students could have taught another 24,000 students, and onwards and onwards and onwards. And then something really, really crazy happened. 24,000 students all passed away during the days of Sphira. In between Pesach and Shavuos, 1 year, all 24,000 students died, except for 5. At this point, Rabbi Akiva is trying to figure out what is the message. What is God trying to tell him? What's going on over here? And so the theory is, I haven't seen this written anywhere, but the theory is that Rabbi Akiva, it says Rabbi Akiva moved to the south of Israel. He moved away from the base Mikdash was already, the Romans were already changing things in a very significant way. And he took these 5 students and he went to the south in order to galvanize or galvanize what they had in Torah, and to make sure that the Torah was not forgotten from the Jewish people. Now, the theory is that Rabbi Akiva Rabbi Akiva decided or considered the fact that something like this could happen in the future, and we could lose Torah forever. And it was his idea that we should consider starting to write things down, just in case, at least in shorthand. At any rate, one of his students was Rabbi Yehuda Bar Ilai, another one was Rabbi Meir, who is very famous in the Mishnah. They're constantly quoted in the Mishnah. It says Stam Mishnah, Rabbi Meir. It says that if there's no one written, like there's no name, there's no one, like who said this, it's Rabbi Meir, which is one of the students of Rabbi Akiva. Another one of the students was Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who wrote the Zohar. And Rabbi Meir's student, who was Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, wrote down the Mishnah. He wrote it in 6 sections. But what he tried to do is something very interesting. What he tried to do is that he tried to solve the context problem. He understood that if you write stuff down, we're going to lose the context. So he decided to write things down in a certain way that it's kind of written in shorthand. And it requires a lot of context. In other words, instead of writing more down in order to solve the context problem, he wrote less down in order so that people should not completely rely on the written word. Because even if you wrote a lot of things down, everything you know, everything you think needs to be written down, there's still something in context that's lost. So he decided to go the other way. He decided to write very little down. In other words, just like the fine edges, the extreme cases, the things that people don't deal with on a daily basis, things that people don't remember, that people forget easily. And he wrote those things down, still relying heavily on people's memory and the oral transmission and tradition that would be passed down. And even what he wrote down, he expected people to learn by heart. In other words, it was like a safety net. Just in case you forget, you can look at the book just to, for the finer points. And that's the Mishnah. So that worked for a little bit. A few hundred years, it worked. People continue to do this 12-year curriculum and to pass on, and they use the Mishnah as it's like cliff notes, or as a guide, or as a structure, also as a structure, because he put all the laws of certain things in one section, another section, so it was indexed and everything, so it was easy to find things more or less. So they continued to teach orally. They continued to transmit orally, and then they used the Mishnah as a guide. As time went on, context started to fade. The edges became fuzzy. And this is where we move over into the Amoraic period. The Amoraic period are those people that taught or expounded or extrapolated and primarily gave context to the Mishnah. Now, at this point, the Jewish people are moving outwards geographically. They're moving away from the land of Israel. They're moving further into the Middle East and into the Far East. And they're moving even a little bit into Europe, into the Mediterranean countries in Europe, to Italy, Greece. And Greece and Italy had Jews even before the destruction of the second Beis Hamikdash. I'm sorry, did I say this was the first Beis Hamikdash? And where all this happened? This is after the destruction of the second temple, the second Beis Hamikdash. All this happens after. Rabbi Akiva lived after the destruction of the second temple. I'm not sure if I said first before, but if I did, that was incorrect. So all this is happening after the destruction of the second Beis Hamikdash, where the Greeks conquered Israel for a period of time from the Persians, and then after the Romans from the Greeks, and so there was a lot of different changes in the land of Israel, a lot of different decrees about how and limitations of what Jews could practice and how and where and what and etc. And so Jews started to move out into what's called today the diaspora, the spread of the Jewish people all throughout the world. So there's Jews now living in Greece and in Italy, and even as far as Spain and Morocco and so on. At least in the very beginnings of this migration. But the center of Jewish life and learning and so on was in Persia and Babylonia, which is today modern day Iran and Iraq. So when you have people that are living in such a great expanse of space without without internet or anything else like that, but even proper mail in which people are able to communicate. There also modern printing presses was not even something that existed. People copied books by hand. You had copies, and people literally sat all day and they were scribes and they wrote down books and they either scrolls or they bound them or whatever. But printing presses only came later in Greece and in Italy hundreds of years later. So it was very difficult to cross-pollinate ideas and arguments and discussions, and to communicate. And to travel was also quite dangerous, also very lengthy. It took a lot of time to travel, even short expanses. And so therefore, what happened is that this rabbi lived all the way somewhere in Tehran, and the other one lived in Israel, and the other one lived in Greece or something. And each one of them was teaching the same Mishnah, and each one remembered it slightly different from their teacher. And they taught it different, and then students heard it, and everyone hears it a little bit different, a little bit of different context. And so therefore, there became arguments very quickly about what exactly is the Mishnah talking about. Again, context, that's what it is. And the whole Gemara is this, that's the big question of the Gemara. What is the Mishnah talking about? Because the Mishnah we know is correct. We've accepted the Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda wrote it. He was a disciple of Rabbi Meir, was a disciple of Rabbi Akiva. We know Rabbi Akiva knew the Torah perfectly, and Rabbi Meir as well. But the question is, in what case, or in what situation, or in what context does the Mishnah say that this is not allowed, or in what case the Mishnah is talking about that it is allowed? Because again, it's written in shorthand. It's written very, very short. So all the different people, all the different rabbis are sitting there learning the Mishnah, and they're using it more and more heavily. They're starting to rely on the Mishnah more heavily as a primary text, not as a backup, not as cliff notes, not as a way to refresh your memory, but as a way to learn to begin with, which is what we use it for today. We read the Mishnah with no context, with no anything. We don't have 12 years of repetition of what, and then the Mishnah is there just to remind us of it's like our notes. And that's what the Amoraim did. They taught the Mishnah and taught the Mishnah the way they understood it, and gave the context, gave the understanding, so that you can read it as a primary text and then come to the class. And so the Mishnah became the new written law, and then the classes of the Amoraim became, the Talmudic sages became the oral law. Again, every time you write something down, there needs to be someone that explains it. Every written law has to come with an oral law. And that lasted for a little bit. And then people found out, as they did travel over the course of many decades and even centuries, they found out that this rabbi over there is explaining the Mishnah like this, and that rabbi over there is explaining the Mishnah quite differently. And actually, they're quite opposite. So what do we do? Like, what's the halacha? What's the bottom line? What do we do here? So so after about 400 years of all this, so two amazing people named Rav Ina and Rav Ashi got together, and they said, what would be if all these people lived at the same time, and they all lived in the same city, and they all studied together in the same study hall? And it would be wild, right? So you're talking about sages that lived over the course of 400 years, that were all teaching the same Mishnah and all having these sort of long distance arguments without knowing that they're arguing with each other at all. But what if we would be able to resurrect them all, put them all in a room together, and have them sort of argue it out and figure out, and come to some sort of conclusion one way or another about what the halakha is? That'd be amazing, right? We'd be able to get to the bottom of all these halachas and find out what the bottom line is. And then we could write all this stuff down, and once and for all, put all of these arguments and discussions to bed. And that this will be, and then we'll write a book, and this will be the halachas of the Jewish people. This will be so they did that virtually. they took all of the different writings and all the different traditions from all the different students that had sat in all of these classes over all of these years that had been passed down from one generation to the next, to the next, to the next. And they put them together in a discussion, or in a discussion format, a question and answer format. And they asked questions, they challenged the differences of opinion. In other words, they'll have one class that says that you're allowed to do this, another class that says that you're not allowed to do that. So they would create this virtual discussion in which they would ask the person, of course, that's not there, they would ask them, why can't you hold like the first person? In what context do you say that you're not allowed to do this? Is it only in a specific scenario? Is it only with these details, with these particular, in this particular scenario, or in which areas or what context would you agree with the other person and whatnot? And they worked and they argued all of this out. Of course, not only using their own ability to figure, to logically extrapolate and to deduce, but they also had, again, we're talking about hundreds of years of classes, so a lot of this was already discussed, and so they put it all together, and they tried to come up with as many bottom line halacha as possible, and that is, and they wrote the whole thing down and they sealed it, that this is it, and this is the Talmud, and this is by far the only thing that we have that is as close to the oral tradition as was passed down, that was given to Moshe on Har Sinai and was passed down for dozens of generations until the Mishnah and the Gemara. Make sense? Understand what I'm saying? Right? Because the Mishnah, again, was just supposed to be very, very short. It was shorthand. And the Gemara it fleshes it out, it extrapolates it, it elucidates it, it explains the context, which is the way chances are it was taught in the desert. However, the only difference is that there's a lot of arguments because we don't know which the halach is. So we have to rely on what's written. We have to rely on proofs. We have to rely on what we can extrapolate from the words of the Chumash, what we can extrapolate from the words of the Mishnah, and what we can extrapolate from the various teachers that we had previously, or what's called svara, what something that makes sense, all types of different logical structure that's used in the Gemara in order to figure something out. One of them is called, for instance, a kav v'chomer, right? If someone says that that you're not allowed to touch a car on Shabbos, so then for sure you know that you're not allowed to drive a car on Shabbos. This is what's called a kav v'chomer. That if you know what a more lenient or a more easy halacha is, so then you know something that's more is for sure not allowed, or that is for sure allowed, depending on which way you're going. So there's all these different logical things that the Gemara introduced in order to deduce and to extrapolate and so on and to figure out based on all these different things. And then you also have stories in the Gemara. Sometimes when there is no svara, there is no logical way of figuring it out, and we don't have any proofs, we don't have any text, we don't have anything to rely on. So then there's stories of things that we saw that the sages did, that one person says, my teacher told me about his teacher that he did this in this scenario. And then the Gemara will talk about it. So you sure it was only in certain contexts? You sure it was maybe only in a certain city when there was a certain custom in that city, and in other cities, it's not the custom, it's not a halacha, it's just the way that the people did things. And this discussion goes on and on and on and on and on and on, sort of arguing everything to death in order to get to the truth. Now, every single fourth, fifth grade kid asks the same question, where it's argued and it's argued and it's argued, it's argued, and then in the end it comes to a conclusion. And so every fifth grade kid says, we spent the past week and a half reading a half a page of Gemara, and in the end, someone brought a proof that worked. That the first proof didn't work, the second proof didn't work, the third proof didn't work. 12 proofs later, they finally come up with something that works. So every kid, or at least one kid in every class asks, why didn't we just bring the end in the beginning? Why do we have to go through all this intellectual acrobatics and loop-de-loops? Why don't we just say the end? And so the answer is, it's a very good question. It's an important question, right? Why have so many pages on and on and on and on discussions? and explaining why every single pasuk or every single story or every single logical proof does not work, why not just say what's the bottom line? And that's it. And so the answer to the question is that 100 years later, 500 years later, someone's going to come and someone's going to say, there's a pasuk that talks about this, and it proves the opposite. And maybe the Gemara is wrong. Or maybe the sages in the Gemara didn't think of that pasuk. They didn't realize. And then the whole thing is thrown into turmoil all over again. Again, context is lost. We don't know. There's no one to ask. And so Gemara decided that instead of all these confusions and so on about what he said, what he could have said, what he might have said, so all of those discussions are put into the Talmud. And that's why there's so much of what does he mean and in what context is he referring, and could he in a certain scenario agree with this person or not? And all these discussions are fleshed out all the way to the end. And sometimes in a way that almost drives you insane. But because there's no end, there's absolutely no end to how many times you can split a hair. If you thought that there was, read Talmud and you'll find out that there isn't. So they put everything in so that no one could come later on and say, oh, you didn't think of this idea, or you didn't think of that pasuk, or you didn't remember, or you didn't know of that story, and now you have the story, so now it sheds light on the. So everything was put into the Talmud, and everything is discussed from beginning to end. And at the end of the day, all halachic discussions start with a pasuk, a mishnah, and a piece of Gemara. So that was fabulous. Finally, we have something that's completely written down, and there's no guessing games anymore. We don't have to rely on memory. We've gotten over that. We've given up on people memorizing and remembering and so on. And now at this point, the diaspora is moving further and further out. People are moving further into Europe, and now even into Eastern Europe and Russia and so on. And there are Jews everywhere, and it's very difficult to transmit information. But now we have the Talmud, and so now everything's good. Everyone just needs a copy of the Talmud in their home, and that's it. And you have everything you need to know. So that worked for a few hundred years, and this was the period of the Goyim, where they taught the Gemara. And at that time, there was no commentaries whatsoever on the Gemara. It was just, that was the commentary. You had the Mishnah and the Chumash, and then you had the Gemara to explain the Mishnah that explains the Chumash. That's it. That's Torah. End of story. 300-400 years later, people start to have a lot of questions about what is the Gemara talking about, because of course, when you write something down, you lose context. That's number one. Number two, it became very, very long. It's a big book. There's a lot of things to learn. And some of the things, there aren't conclusions in the Gemara. Sometimes the Gemara stays with a question, and it's an argument. It's what's called a machlokes. It's a disagreement between two Amirayim, and we don't know. And we have these two opinions, there's two approaches, and that's it. And so along came the period called the Rishonim. The Rishonim literally means the earlies, and what it refers to is the early commentators of the Talmud. So some of the more famous Rishonim that you may have heard of is a guy by the name of the Rambam, another one by the name of Rashi, others called by the name of the Rosh, Rabbeinu Asher, the Rif, Rabbi Fasi, the Ran, Rabbeinu Nissim, and they were the Rishonim, what's called the early commentators, and they lived in different places and at different times over the course of 400 or 500 years, and they wrote different commentaries on the Mishnah and on the Talmud in order to elucidate and to explain and make it easier and fill in the blanks where things were fuzzy. Or now the Rosh, the Ran, and the Rif did something, took it even a step further. Rashi wrote, sort of just to fill in the gaps, just to understand what's going on. So you should be able to read it and understand it. And the Rosh, the Ran, the Rif said, the Gemara is so long, we have to condense it. And we need the arguments, and we need all of the different logical stuff that goes on in the Gemara, but everyone needs something you can open up and read a case in this situation, in this context, this is the halacha, this is the din, and that's it. And then if you want to know where that comes from, and if you think you have a story or a pasuk or whatever that contradicts that, then you can go back to the Gemara and you can spend a lifetime of learning, figuring out how we got to that conclusion. But he cut out all of the discussion, and all three of them did this in one way or another, and they condensed the Gemara so that it just gives you the bottom line. Again, Torah is getting too big, and so we're trying to condense it and make it just like the Mishnah or the oral law. There's a pasuk. The pasuk is written very short. There's an oral law that goes with it. The Mishnah is very short, and then we were supposed to understand it based on memory. Then the Gemara came along. The Gemara was good, but then people didn't understand it. And there's commentaries, and so now there's a commentary on the commentary on the commentary on the commentary, and it's too long. And someone just wants to know: Can I turn on my light switch on Shabbos or not? Is this thing kosher or not? So they condensed it again, condensed in order to give people the bottom line. What do we do? 300-400 years later. So then now we have this. So this is a volume of the Gemara, Sechus Kedushin. So here we have like this. So this is the Gemara. The original Gemara is the word is in the center of the page, right? This stuff over here. And then you have Rashi that's always on the inside of the page. It was one of the early Rishonim. And then the Tosafos were also extrapolated on the Gemara. And then that's just what's on the page. You know, if you haven't gotten blind from all those tiny letters, so then you have in the back of the Gemara after all of this is discussed. So then you have all of this, and this is the condensed stuff. Okay, this is all the commentaries, the condensed things, in order to make it easy, right? Very easy to read and to learn. You know, very clearly spelled out, and so on. Yeah, So that's that. So when we ended up with this. So then we ended up what's called the Seat of Talmud, and you can understand why, because this is just one small part of the law of Judaism. We have another 20 volumes like this, and I took one of the thin ones because I had to carry it. So you have much fatter ones. So along came an individual in the 1500s by the name of Rabbi Yosef Kare. I'm sorry, I'm jumping ahead. So the son of one of these people, Rabbeinu Asher, who's right in the beginning over here, he said that we need to organize this. We need to index this. He says, if you want to know something here, this is the laws of marriage. But if you want to really know what the laws of marriage are, there's another 4 books that you need to learn in order to really understand what it's talking about. Because in the Talmud, things aren't written with indexes, and it's not so organized. So there's a lot of things that are written in many different places, and only if you learn all of the different books, because that's the way it was originally designed, that you would learn everything, and it wasn't so long in the beginning, right? There's only the little text in the middle. It's not so long. After the commentaries, then it becomes enormous. But you were supposed to read everything, and everything is in its place, more or less. The discussions cross from one to the next. So the son of the Rush came along and he says, we have to put things in more of an organized fashion. So he took the Gemara and he took his father's writings with the condensed, bottom line stuff, and he organized things into 4 sections called Arachayim, the Yardei, Chashimishba, Nebuchadnezzar. Each section is a different section of laws, and all the laws are in that section. And he indexed it with a table of contents, which also gave you context. And you were able to look into the table of contents, and you were able to look the halachas and the breakdown, and you were able to find what you're looking for exactly. And you were able to read that section, and everything that was in that section discussed everything that you needed to know about that section. You didn't have to go and look in 15 other different books. Fine. Then a little while later, there's a guy named Rabbi Yosef Kare. He was born in Spain, and then he came to live in the city of Tzfas, and he wrote what's called the Shulchan Aruch. He said that relying on anything that has to do with the Gemara, relying on anything that has to do with the language of the Gemara, which was Aramaic, which was at that point a completely dead language. It wasn't used, it wasn't spoken at all. The only people that knew it were the people that learned the Talmud, and they learned it to learn the Talmud. It was just a language that you learned in order to understand this stuff. He said people don't understand Aramaic anymore. It's an ancient language. People don't understand what's going on in the Talmud. It's so many details, there's so many arguments, and so on and so forth. And by the way, in the commentaries, there's just as many arguments as there is in the Talmud. Don't think that everyone agreed finally when we got to the Rishonim period. There's just as many arguments between the Rishonim as there are between the Amoraim, even more so than there's arguments in the Mishnah. So the arguments just go on and on and on, and it's just endless. So he says we have to give people the bottom line, and we have to do it in Hebrew, in a basic language, simple language that people could understand. And that's what he did. He wrote what's called the Shulchan Aruch. It's called the set table. Shulchan Aruch, the set table. where he puts everything out, and you don't have to go look in one book and another and learn different languages and so on. You read it, find the content, you find the table of contents, you find the halachas that you want to read, you open it up and you look at it. Now, this is beautiful, right? It's a big deal, because now you have this whole set of shas. It's like way too big for anyone to read. You're half blind from reading all the tiny little letters. And so he wrote something, he was a book with 4 sections, and he followed this thing with the 4 sections. He thought what the Torah did was brilliant, and he followed it. Okay, so what's the problem? Anyone listening? What did we lose? Context. Not only that, but now, because the Jews are so spread out, now we have other problems. Now we have Sephardim, we have Ashkenazim, we have different customs, we have different backgrounds, different this, different that. So the Yosef Kari, I said, was born in Spain. Spain is our Sephardim, and he moved to Israel, which is also Sephardim. So he wrote according to the Sephardic tradition. And then there was a guy who lived at the same time, lived in Krakow. He's the rabbi of Krakow, and he started writing something similar to what Yosef Kari did. And then when he saw the book, he printed it before him, and when he got it, he said, "Wow, this is great." But it doesn't have the Ashkenazic tradition. It doesn't have all of our stuff. So he wrote notes on the Shulchan Aruch, and basically he went with everything that he said. And then when there was a difference in the custom, he says in this case or this particular thing, we have a different custom. And so when it was printed again, it was printed with all of his notes. So now the Shulchan Aruch and his notes underneath. Okay, that's still digestible. Okay, wait another 50 years, we lose more context. Persecution against Jews becomes more intense, people become dumber, whatever. Both, a little bit of both, a lot of both. And came along 2 people that didn't know that they lived, that each other, that the other one lived, that the other one existed. One lived in Ukraine and was running away from the Cossacks. And then there was another one who's a rabbi in also in Krakow, but years later. And he wrote commentaries on the Shulchan Aruch, because again, it lost context, it got fuzzy and so on. And they were both printed more or less at the same time. They didn't know, again, there was no rabbinic WhatsApp groups. So they didn't know what the other person was at. So they both wrote it, and it was both printed in the subsequent printings of the Shulchan Aruch after that. Then wait another 50 years, people are confused about what they said, and there were commentaries on that, commentaries on that, and commentaries on that. And so Rabbi Yosef Kari's beautiful idea, in order to get away from all of this and all of this, so in about 200-300 years, we ended up with this. Big improvements, right? So again, you have the Shulchan Aruch in the middle, you have the commentaries on the side, commentaries on the bottom. And guess what? We even figured out how to put commentaries in the back, just like we do in the Gemara. So in about 300-400 years, we did exactly the same thing. We remade another Gemara. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not making fun. Chas v'shalom, absolutely not. I'm just showing the irony of what happens with context and the way it's lost. And this is just the way it is. Now, this is written in Aramaic, in ancient text, and it's very, very difficult to understand in relation to this. This is written in plain Hebrew, and it's much easier to learn Shulchan Aruch than it is Gemara. It takes much less time. However, there are still many arguments and many discussions about what the halacha is. It's just now easier to find the arguments, maybe, than it was before. Why am I telling you all this, and why am I keeping you here later than you should be? This is as an introduction to this class. Those that learn Gemara in a way what's called a pilpul, and this was something that was very, very big, or that started about 500 years ago. And it was learning Talmud for the sake of learning Talmud, just to get into the arguments and to find ways of splitting hairs. There's many different ways and directions. It's people that spend their whole lives completely immersed in the world of Torah, and they look for ways to broaden and lengthen and deepen the Seat of Talmud and Torah in general. And it's a beautiful, beautiful thing. However, a lot of people get lost with that because it has no context, or it has no practical application. And that's why the Torah came along, and the Beis Yosef came along, and the Yosef Kare and the Ramah, and all these others, because the most important thing is that we should know, what does Hashem want from us to do? Of course, He wants us to learn Torah also, which it's beautiful to learn Torah for its own sake, but we have to know what to do. And so, therefore, the best way of learning Talmud is what's called aliba de hilchasei. You have to learn what it says in the Gemara. You have to see what it says with the arguments of how the Torah or how the laws developed. It's important to understand the context of how it developed, because if you don't know the development of the idea, you don't have the full context. And then after that, to understand how that stretched or was continued to be developed until it became a bottom line halacha of what we do today. And when you do that, it becomes alive, it becomes real. It's not just some abstract thing talking about some coin that existed somewhere in the Far East that we don't even know, and is talking in a language and talking about customs in a city that don't exist today and that we don't have, etc. But that it actually connects it with something that we do on a regular basis, and to understand all that background of how it starts from a pasuk to a Mishnah to a Gemara to the commentaries on the Gemara, and how it goes to the Torah, into the Shulchan Aruch, and the commentaries on the Shulchan Aruch, etc., all the way until even not only just the law, but also the minhagim, the customs that each one of our different communities have. Because if you think that we were satisfied with only Ashkenazim and Sephardim, you're very wrong. We have many different groups and many different customs, and all the customs are very beautiful and very wonderful, but they're all different, and that's a nice thing. So all the different colors of the tapestry make a beautiful curtain. So that's what this, I know. And so that's what this class is about. This class is about learning a little bit of what it says in the Mishnah, explaining how it's discussed in the Gemara, and then extend it all the way into a halachic practical application, and to understand how we end up with a pasuk that seems very difficult to understand, or that seemingly has nothing to do with this particular custom or halacha, and to see how this has expanded and extrapolated through all of these books and all of it. It's a journey, or it's a tour through 3,000 years of Jewish scholarship, and I hope you will enjoy. I'd like to just say one last thing, and I'm sorry I'm keeping you here so late, but one last thing, which is